Right. Hello, all. Welcome back to Stories from History, where we go over some interesting stories from history, whether that's about people, places, events, whatever it is. If it's an interesting story from history, we're here to tell it. And today I thought I'd go over the story of an epic figure. I'm sure we all know about him as lovers of history. How can we not? Napoleon Bonaparte. Legendary general, legendary leader, legendary individual who innovated so much in his time, from military to politics to culture. There's a very few people that have ever lived that had as much influence on current world events as Napoleon. And without further ado, we will jump right into his epic story. So, some men rise with history, and others force history to rise with them. And Napoleon was a man who believed truly in his heart that the world could be shaped by willpower alone. And for a time, he was right. But like all tragic figures, the very belief that lifted him to greatness would one day pull him down. So let's go a bit back to the start of his life, where Napoleon was merely an outsider. Born in Corsica in 1769, a little island that was only recently taken over by France. Napoleon here grows up caught between two identities. At school in mainland France, he is mocked relentlessly. A classmate recalled of him that he was taciturn, solitary, almost savage, easily angered. He withdrew inward, isolated himself, read obsessively. He devoured Plutarch, especially stories about great men like Alexander and Caesar. But for him, this wasn't about admiration, it was about comparison. Napoleon began to measure himself against history and quietly concluded that he belonged among it. And this created something powerful in Napoleon and dangerous, because it created a man who did not want just success but inevitability. And so we see successes when opportunity meets preparation. Well, Napoleon was preparing himself in school, and we see he finally gets a chance in 1793, in the midst of the French Revolution. We see that France is in chaos. Royalists fighting on the side of the king and queen hold the port of Toulon, backed by the British. Napoleon at this time, finishing his education, was just a young artillery officer, and there was not many artillery officers in the army due to the revolution, the purges, all the different wars. So Napoleon got a bit lucky, and he was given responsibility to get back the port of Toulon. And instead of just focusing on the city, he studies the terrain carefully and notices that the high ground controlling the harbour is needed. That is the strategic strong point. He places his artillery correctly, bombarding the British ships that are helping the royalists in Toulon. And they abandon the royalists, and Toulon falls. And one of the officers present observed that Napoleon just seemed to instinctively know where to strike. And soon after this again, we see another royalist uprising, and now Napoleon, with a little bit of credentials in history, is called to defend the government, and his solution is grapeshot, which is like cannonballs that kind of split into small pieces, kind of like a shotgun shells. He orders cannons loaded with anti-personnel rounds and fires into the crowd at close range. Hundreds are cut down instantly, and this is famously described later as a whiff of grapeshot. Cold, efficient, decisive. This reveals something crucial about Napoleon, and it was that he did not hesitate when violence was required. This wasn't out of cruelty, it was because he saw it as a tool to be used and mastered against his opposition. And now we travel to Italy, where we see Napoleon take command of the army of Italy, France's army of Italy, which at the time is broken. Hungry, poorly equipped, demoralized. When Napoleon arrived, he was seen in the same light as the army. A fellow officer mocked him. They said his appearance was miserable, and he inspired little confidence. But again, we see that everything changes when he speaks. He tells them, "Soldiers, you are naked and ill-fed. I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world." And then he actually delivers. Napoleon moves fast, splitting enemy forces, attacking before they can unite, and winning again and again. A soldier later said he made us feel invincible. And physically, something strange was noted repeatedly, that when he commanded, his presence expanded. Here we see Napoleon discovers his true power. It's not just strategy, it's psychological domination. He doesn't react to events. He imposes his will onto them. And so we see Napoleon turn to Egypt, officially to strike British trade routes, but privately, he dreams of an empire to the east. At the Battle of the Pyramids, he tells his men, "From the heights of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you." He wins decisively. But Egypt reveals some of his weaknesses. The British destroy his fleet at the Nile. He is stranded. And campaigns begin to grow brutal. During the Syrian campaign at the city of Jaffa, plague breaks out amongst French troops. And here we see one of Napoleon's darkest episodes. Reports begin to emerge that Napoleon ordered terminally ill soldiers to be given opium to avoid slowing the army down. Whether this is exaggerated or not, it shows how far Napoleon was willing to go. Efficiency over humanity. And soon after this, he abandons his army in Egypt and secretly returns to France. Already, he's beginning to shape reality for himself. And we then see Napoleon begin to seize power in the coup. France is unstable again, and Napoleon sees this weakness and acts accordingly. During the coup of 18 Brumaire, he nearly loses control. He is shouting down in Parliament, and a witness even states that he seemed shaken and almost panicked. But then he regains himself. He calls in troops, ends the assembly, and takes power. And this is important. Even in his moments of doubt, he forced himself forward. He did not retreat internally. And so we see in 1804, Napoleon crowns himself emperor in Notre Dame Cathedral. He famously takes the crown from the Pope and places it on his own head. And this was a deliberate message, that his authority comes from himself alone. He restructures France, creating the Napoleonic Code, implementing merit-based advancement, and creating order from chaos. But internally something shifts. He begins to believe he is not just leading history, but that he is directing it. And so, we see Napoleon at his peak. We fast forward to the Battle of Austerlitz. Here Napoleon executes one of the greatest battles in history. He presents his army as deliberately weak, luring enemies in, and then striking precisely. An officer wrote that everything unfolded exactly as he had predicted, hour by hour. And this is Napoleon at his absolute peak. We see he has total clarity, total confidence, and total control. And this is where the tragedy deepens, because repeated perfection often creates illusions that he cannot be wrong. And so we see what many consider to be Napoleon's, not biggest mistake, but the one that led to his downfall. And this was Napoleon's invasion of Spain. Napoleon decides to invade Spain randomly and turn against his allies, the French monarchy. And he assumes that this war will go like the others. But this one is different. There are no clear set-piece battles, just resistance. Ambush, retreat, repeat. This drains France, and Napoleon grows very frustrated. Here we see his flaws emerge clearly, as he tries to solve complexity with force. But Spain cannot be crushed like Austria or Prussia. And amidst this conflict, Russia begins to notice the weakness of the French and begins to ignore some of the rules set by Napoleon. And so this leads to Napoleon marching 600,000 men in 1812 into Russia. Napoleon did this expecting a decisive battle. Instead, the Russians implement what is now known as a scorched earth tactic. They retreat, they burn everything, even their ancient capital Moscow. Napoleon enters the city empty, burning, and the general recalls that for the first time, Napoleon seemed uncertain. A harsh Russian winter arrives, and the retreat begins. Men freeze, starve, die. Entire columns just disappear. This isn't just a defeat, it is the destruction of a system. Because Napoleon's power relied on speed, control, and decisive victories. Russia gave him none of these. And so we see, after this loss, that the whole of Europe rises against him. He is defeated once and exiled, but somehow returns with the support of the French. And he makes one last attempt to reclaim destiny at Waterloo. But things go wrong. Napoleon's enemies have finally learned his tactics, and he's bitten off a bit more than he can chew this time. We see many delays and misjudgments, but more than that, Napoleon is no longer the same man. Not broken, but diminished. The French army is destroyed, and Napoleon is exiled to Saint Helena, where he dies. Still thinking, still justifying, and still believing. And that is the tragedy. Napoleon was not destroyed by weakness, but by the same force that made him great. And this is absolute belief in himself. Like Macbeth, he did not fall because he lacked power, but because he could not stop reaching for more. And when we look at Napoleon, we see a man who believed that he really could shape the world through his actions. And truthfully, for a time, he made the world believe he could too, because he did. So, if you liked that video, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. If you have any other interesting stories from history you'd like us to go over, please do let us know. But yeah, that was a fun story to go through. Please leave suggestions in the comments. Keep learning, keep reading, keep studying, keep being a big fan of history. Stories from history, signing out.